The Blacksmith. A long time ago, there was a village near a castle. It was a home to a very special blacksmith. He was a humble man, but know for sure he was also very skilled. A man of integrity who would keep his word even to his own hurt. Standing behind every item he skillfully crafted. Although he excelled as a craftsman, that was not his highest achievement. He was known more for his character than his workmanship. They were hand in glove. He would never take shortcuts, nor promise something he could not deliver. His shop, although at first glance seemed somewhat normal, was carefully laid out in measured detail. His name? Joshua. The spring had been unusually cool and wet. Everywhere you looked there was standing water. The countryside had small ponds in every field. Though the farmers were delayed in planting, Joshua was not short for work. Then again, he never was. A large steed, heavily clad, rumbled up to the blacksmith shop. The impatient prince from the castle dismounted and strode into the shop. As the prince entered, he quickly abutted a half-wall and gate inside the shop several feet from the door. The proud prince crashed up against it in his mail suit, intentionally making as much of a scene as possible. "Here, Smith!" he bellowed. Joshua calmly and respectfully ceased his pounding and set down his hammer, stating, "Yes, sire. How may I assist you?" The prince curtly answered, "I'm in need of a new sword immediately. There is no time for delay. Can you have it ready by the morning?" Joshua responded, "Sire, with all due respect, that is not possible for me to make a quality sword for you in such a short time." "Nonsense!" the prince blasted. "However, I will give you 2 days. Certainly that will be enough." "Sire, if you desire a sword from me, it will be of the finest quality. However, such a sword will take up to 2 weeks to forge," Joshua explained. Impatiently, the prince shouted, "If you will not do the will of the prince, then you will receive no work from the castle." And with that he stormed out of the shop, mounted his steed, and headed to the other smith in the village. Although he was disappointed, Joshua quietly prayed and continued his work. Only a few days later, the tragic news of the death of the prince was announced. It wasn't long before the rumors had reached the small village of what happened. Evidently, in the heat of battle, the new sword, forged by the other smith, shattered, leaving the prince helpless and mortally wounded. Shaking his head, Joshua whispered to himself, "If only he had the wisdom to wait. For those things worthwhile take invested time." As the sunshine began to dry up the countryside, the farmers sought the services of the blacksmiths for tools and implements. Work began to pile up. Joshua, however, never compromising, always kept the shop closed during the Sabbath. His diligence in keeping Yahweh's commands was even more vigilant than his attention to detail in his craft. One morning, a farmer new to the area came to Joshua's shop, carrying a broken tool. As he entered, he stood looking at the half wall with the small gate. The shop looked more organized and cleaner than many of the smiths he'd seen. "Excuse me, Smith, do you have time to fix a plowhead?" Joshua glanced up and walked over, greeting the man. "Hello, my name is Joshua. I will be glad to fix your plow." Glancing down, he examined the plow. He continued, "I will not get to it until day after tomorrow, and it should be ready late in the day on Sunday." "Seems agreeable to me. And your charge?" questioned the farmer. "2 farthings, Joshua responded. "Agreed. I'll just set the parts over there." The farmer began to push inside the small gate. "That will not be necessary. Just set them down. Reuben?" Within seconds, an energetic young man appeared behind the farmer. "Yes, sir," the young man said with a respectful and joyful smile. "Son, I would have you place those plow pieces over next to the goad." "Thank you." He then turned aside to some equipment away from the fire. Without hesitation, the young man said, "Excuse me, sir," and picked up the pieces and placed them at the far wall near a broken goad. As he reached the other side of the room, a very small girl walked into the shop and headed for the gate. Assuming the young girl was the smith's daughter, the farmer said, "Would you like me to open the gate for you, young lass?" "No," the little girl said wide-eyed. "Daddy said I supposed to wait till he says so." At that moment, Joshua turned swiftly around and said, "You are a wise and obedient daughter, and Yahweh promises you a long life because of it." The little girl gave the joyful big smile, knowing she had pleased her father, and said, "Mama says it's getting late and dinner will be ready soon." "Okay," Joshua said with a smile and continued, "The Sabbath is soon upon us. I'm looking forward to the rest and peace. Let Mama know we'll be there soon." The little girl happily skipped away. Joshua faced the farmer and said, "I must wrap things up and close down as Sabbath approaches." He picked up a sign near the door and hung it on the front side of the door. It read, "Closed. To remember Yahweh's Sabbath and to keep it set apart." Just then another man, middle-aged and very anxious, stepped into the shop. "Joshua, I need this riveted right away." He then presented several pieces of leather with hardware attached. "Samuel, I'm closing for the day. I can rivet it on Sunday." "No, Joshua, this is an emergency. I need it for tomorrow's race. It broke a couple of weeks ago, but I've been meaning to get it to you. But now I'm out of time," Samuel said, getting irritated. "No, Samuel, you have had time to take care of this. However, I can help you on Sunday, and I'm not going to help you indulge yourself with your own desires on Yahweh's Sabbath. You know what the prophet Isaiah has said about these things," Joshua stated definitively. "Keep your sermons to yourself, Joshua. I need a smith, not a preacher." With that, he stormed off. The farmer, surprised at the encounter and yet the tranquil air about the smith, asked, "Is there another smith near here?" Joshua matter-of-factly stated, "Yes. In fact, you would have passed it if you came through town from the west." "Oh, I must have missed it. The only thing that really caught my eye when I came into town, if you'll forgive me for mentioning it, was a little girl who looked as if she had been in an accident. She was playing in the street by herself," the farmer said. "Yes, that is the smith's daughter. She entered his shop when he wasn't paying attention, and she was badly burned. They were not sure she was going to survive, but despite the situation, she still provides a lot of sunshine, although she will wear the scars for life." The farmer asked, "Is that why you put up the half wall and gate here?" "Actually, I built this when Reuben was first born. You see, I've raised the children to first obey Yahweh, and he has said to them they are to honor and obey me and my wife. If we teach them to obey him, then they will be obedient to us. One of my instructions is that no one is allowed past the half wall unless I give the permission. That permission will come when I know that they are mature enough and obedient to the rules of the shop. Then they will be safe and able to help. But before that time, if they cannot obey a simple instruction to remain behind the wall, they will not obey when I tell them more complicated instructions. Instructions that will even protect their lives or others. And one more point, sir, if I may. If our children cannot obey the simple instructions about the physical things of this earth, how will they understand and obey those spiritual matters with which we are charged to instruct them, as Yahweh has said? Was it not Yeshua who made this very point with Nicodemus, who came to him at night with some important questions? You make a valid point, one it seems that your children have followed, as I have seen in your young daughter. Thank you, sir. May you have a blessed day, and I'll see you late Sunday." With that, the farmer cordially turned and walked out, pondering the few words of the blacksmith. "And may Yahweh bless you, sir," Joshua stated gracefully. As he closed up the shop, Reuben asked, "Father, I saw something I never noticed before at the other smith's shop. Mr. Levi was outside, and I noticed he was missing one of his fingers and a small portion of his hand. Do you know what happened?" As they walked home, Joshua answered his son. "Yes, it happened when he was a child. He was in his father's shop, the one he owns now, and was playing with some of the metal shavings. His father told him that he shouldn't be playing with them, but Mr. Levi didn't listen. I was there and heard his father say to someone in the shop, 'Well, if he doesn't listen, that's on him. But if he gets hurt, he'll never do it again.' Unfortunately for Mr. Levi, he got several small pieces of metal embedded in his hand. He didn't notice it at first, but soon he had a bad reaction. The infection got so bad that it poisoned his bloodstream. In order to save his life, they had to take part of his hand. You see, Mr. Levi and I grew up together and had been close friends, but the scars and limitations always seemed to embitter him. It seems that he blames Elohim or others for all of his problems, and truly never takes ownership for his own choices. A wise man of integrity will own responsibility and therefore take righteous action in all situations as Yahweh guides him." Reuben asked, "Are you still friends?" Joshua answered his son, "Not really. Son, you know that our true family are those who hear the words of Yahweh and obey him. As time continues, the closer you get to Yahweh and the further they get from him, there is no common bond anymore. And as much as I want Mr. Levi and others to know and love Yahweh, I can't make them. I can only tell them the truth. Over the many years, he has simply chosen a path that I cannot support. And as the scripture says, Elohim will not be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Reuben, do you know what happened to the prince in the battle? The sword he had, that he trusted his life with in battle, was made by the hand of Mr. Levi. The prince had come to me first, but was unwilling to wait for the time to make a quality sword. Son, I want to share something with you about the sword. How to forge a sword is very important. If it is made incorrectly, it becomes brittle. In battle, a brittle sword can cost your life. Would you put your life at risk with something that could fail when it really matters? A quality sword takes days, sometimes weeks to forge, heating, pounding, folding until all that is left is pure steel. Heating, cooling, oiling, sharpening, and polishing all must be done in their appropriate ways. This is not just a lesson in smithing, it is a lesson in life, Reuben. I want you to realize that in our lives it is Yahshua who is the blacksmith forging us. He applies the heat until we are red hot and pounds us on the steel anvil of those who have been forged before us. He takes the hammer of those tested and tried and strikes iron on iron to press us into a tool for his good use. He immerses us in water, oils, and then sharpens us. Sometimes the coals and heat are the trials of life that burn away the weaknesses of our hearts. He can also use the circumstances we face to pound us straight, so that our life is not twisted or bent. And when he is finished, the result is like a sword of the highest quality. A sword of such quality rarely even shows the slightest mar from being used. Even when struck against hard metal, it only slightly scratches the surface. The only thing that needs to be done for such a sword is careful sharpening of the finest edge. The sword itself will stand the test of time and age, Joshua said with a light in his eyes, as to say there is much more to the story. Have you ever made such a sword, Father? Reuben asked. Yes, a few. They take a great deal of effort. My hope is that they will not have to be used. My expectation is that they will not fail when they are, Joshua continued. Reuben, more than the greatest sword, my desire is to honor Yahweh by shaping my children into the chosen vessels he desires. And as you and your sister mature, Yahweh will forge you into the instruments of his choice. But hear me clearly, son. Unlike metal, you have a choice. The pounding of the blacksmith is required to shape the implement. However, if your heart is humble before Yahweh, and you are faithfully obedient, always putting His desires above your own, it may not require as many blows to shape your metal. The Scriptures are complete with many examples to show us the results of both the faithful and unfaithful people. They are, in comparison, like the brittle sword on which the prince counted and failed, and they are like the sword which I will show you. Moments later, they were walking into the front door of a peaceful home with the smells of good food and the shining face of a beautiful wife and daughter preparing the evening meal as the sun was beginning to set. Sabbath was upon them. Kneeling down together in a small circle, they prayed, thanking Yahweh for a wonderful day and time to enjoy his Sabbath with his blessing and peace. Reuben was intrigued with the conversation he and his father had shared. It struck an interest in him. Out of curiosity, he wanted to see what the Scriptures had to say about swords. The first thought was Goliath. He quickly turned to the book of Samuel and read about the sword, how Goliath had a great sword, but it did him no good when facing David, because David trusted in Yahweh. And David even used Goliath's sword against him and took it as a spoil of war. Quite some time later, when David was fleeing King Saul, he went to the priests of Nob, seeking food and a sword. The priest offered some bread and said the only sword that they had was the sword of Goliath. David responded, "I will take it. There is none like it." That got Reuben thinking about its quality and value. He also read about the time when Israel had no blacksmith and had to have their instruments sharpened and taken care of by the Philistines, their enemies. So many thoughts raced through his head about the significance of what that would mean for Israel. Then his thoughts jumped to the night when Yahshua was betrayed, and he had told the disciples that a time was coming when they would need a sword, and they stated that they had two. Within hours of that statement, Kepha was wielding one, probably at the traitor Judas, and he struck the servant of the high priest. Yahshua told them, "It is enough. Put away your sword." Reuben kept reading as instance after instance came to mind about the subject. Pondering these things carefully as one thought led to another, he looked forward to talking to his father about all that he had gleaned. As they talked later in the day, Reuben shared many different lessons and perceptions. His father added to them various insights of wisdom and maturity from Scripture to continue to sharpen his son. Then came the question, "Father, what about the sword you mentioned?" "Can I see it?" asked Reuben. Joshua turned around and headed to the corner of the room. Curiously, Reuben watched as his father stood facing the wall. He reached out his hand about waist high and touched what seemed to be just a knot in the wood-paneled wall. But to his surprise, a small door popped open, and his father reached carefully inside, pulling out what obviously was a sword wrapped in a beautiful blue cloth. With the quiet confidence of a father sharing with his son a chosen and special moment in time, a rite of passage, he said, "Reuben, carefully unwrap it and lay it on the table." Reuben was beyond intrigued with the whole situation. So many thoughts were racing in his head. How long had his father had this? How could I never notice the secret door? And he deliberately quieted his thoughts and followed his father's instructions. What a truly amazing sword, he thought to himself, as he carefully laid it on the table. "I don't think even the king's sword is so magnificent," he said with a respectful tone. Then he waited for his father to speak. "Reuben, I'm sure that you have many thoughts and questions. But the fact that you were able to overcome the curiosity, submit yourself to my instruction carefully, and now wait with patience quietly for me to explain, testifies that you are mature and ready to know about the sword," his father said with a great sense of joy. The conversation carried late into the night as Joshua explained to Reuben where the sword came from and the forging process through which it had come. It began 2 generations before. Joshua explained how his father and Mr. Levi's father were brothers. They had both been apprentices to their fathers as blacksmiths. Joshua's father, Jacob was the second son of Aaron, and Jonathan was the firstborn and father of Levi. Aaron had carefully taught both sons the trade of a blacksmith. Both were skilled. However, Jacob paid careful attention to his father's instructions, not seeking to bend or go around them. It was not that way for Jonathan. He was quite impatient and given to anger. He was careless with his craft, and likewise careless with his family. These traits were passed down to the next generation. But they were the starting point for Jonathan and Jacob. As time progressed, the traits of each family grew in intensity, one to righteousness and integrity, and the other to worldliness and tragedy. As the story unfolded, the pieces of the past showed very different paths, one narrow and blessed, and the other broad, and for lack of a different word, cursed. One that sought Yahweh with all of their heart first, and were obedient, and the other that indulged in selfishness. Joshua went on to describe how each generation carried the scars of the choices they had made. But the difference in the 2 families was not necessarily how they started, but how they chose to follow Yahweh or not. With us, son, there's no compromising Yahweh nor His word. We seek to honor Him in everything. If we sinned, we repent and seek to be righteous, not to blame others or the circumstance. And our Father in heaven continues to forge and pound the impurities out of our lives, so that we can be the most pure and effective tool in His hand. But it is not so for others. As Psalm 1 says so well, Reuben began to quote, "Blessed is the man who shall not walk in the counsel of the wrong, and shall not stand in the path of sinners, and shall not sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the instructions of Yahweh, and he meditates on his instructions day and night. For he shall be as a tree planted by the rivers of waters, that yields its fruit in its season, and whose leaf does not wither. And whatever he does prospers. The wrong are not so, but they are like chaff, which the wind blows away. Therefore the wrong shall not rise in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For Yahweh knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wrong comes to naught." Well said, son. And blessed is the man who trusts in Yahweh, whose trust is Yahweh. And, Reuben continued, trust Yahweh with all of your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He will direct your path. It's beginning to get late, and the Sabbath will soon conclude. We've talked about many things. Tonight, I want you to take the sword with you and set it on your table in your room, and consider the many lessons you have learned today. With wisdom and patience, as I have seen and know you have both, pray for Yahweh's leading, that you may hear, understand, and obey Him. He will direct you. The next day was going to be a day to remember. Joshua and Reuben headed off to the shop while Mama and Hadassah stayed at home. Both pairs had a wonderful time beginning the day in their tasks, sharing the many good things of Yahweh together. Once they arrived at the shop, there was a commotion at the other end of the street on the west of town at the other blacksmith shop. There were sharp words and harsh yelling. Joshua, although strong, respected, and sought out, was not one to gossip, nor meddle in something that he was not welcome. And it was made very clear long ago that he was not welcome in the other blacksmith shop. Joshua and Reuben continued their conversation and prepared the shop as they always did. It wasn't long before some of the townspeople came to share what had happened. An edict and a proclamation had come from the king, The shop of Levi was to be closed, and he was to leave the territory protected by the king. Levi and his family would no longer be protected by the king. Even as the visitors to Joshua's shop continued to explain the details, you could hear the yelling of Levi all through the town. Arguably, the king could have executed Levi for the faulty sword he had made for the prince, but instead he simply banished him from his kingdom. Hours went by, and then the fateful moment came when Levi would be riding his wagon past Joshua's shop for the last time. Joshua could hear the wagon approaching. He resolved to simply stay in the shop and continue his work. But Levi had parting words. "Joshua, you know this is your fault." "I know you can hear me," Levi shouted. "If you would have made that sword to begin with, this never would have happened. Now you have it all. What you've always wanted." He continued to seethe. "May I never see you again, Joshua, and good riddance." Joshua appeared at the doorway of the shop with Reuben at his right shoulder. He stood strong but sad as he wiped his hands on a soiled cloth. Levi spit in his direction and called to the team, "Ha!" and went off. Reuben waited until no one was around before he addressed his father. "Father?" "Yes," Joshua stated sadly. "Why didn't you say anything? You know he was wrong for blaming you." "Yes, but Yeshua's words were ringing in my ears. 'Do not give what is set apart to the dogs, nor throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces.' I have learned the hard way. When you have shared the goodness of Yahweh with others and they trample it and attack you, it simply is a fulfillment of what Yeshua said. So I chose no longer to be in that situation. With discernment, I will not give what is set apart to dogs," Joshua stated as his voice began to trail off. "But Father, isn't he family?" Reuben asked with uncertainty. "Son, we are relatives by our ancestors, but we are not family. As Yeshua said, whoever does the desire of my Father who is in the heavens is my brother and my sister and my mother. That is our family too, Reuben. That doesn't mean we are cruel or unkind to others, even relatives who treat us poorly. It means the real family of Elohim is bound together in obedience, not in a bloodline. And the hope is that they may see and repent. But as the scriptures say, Elohim will not be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, and out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks." With that, Joshua and Reuben continued to work silently as they thought and pounded iron. "I have something for you to ponder on for a while, son. What are you sowing in your life? And someday, what are you going to reap from it? And by the way, remember that your words really do reveal what is in your heart." A few hours later, the farmer came ready to pick up his plow. "Thank you, Joshua. Your work is very good," the farmer stated as he examined his plow, looking almost new. "I hear you are the only blacksmith around now. News gets around quickly." "There may be only one shop, but I'm not the only smith. Am I, Reuben?" he said with a smile. No, sir. There are two," Reuben replied with a little bit of a stunned tone in his voice. "Well, I hope that you can carry on the work your father does, young man. He is a fine example all around," said the farmer. "Yes, sir. As Yahweh gives me strength and direction, I will," Reuben stated with a quiet, confident, and nodding reassurance from his father. The farmer paid Joshua and politely said, "I hope to talk to you again soon, regardless of whether I need a smith or not. Blessings to you both." "And may Yahweh bless you as well," Reuben stated, with Joshua nodding his head. The end.